We are very, very glad to present to you today Ellen Altfest and Marina Cashdan. Culture Now is a series of just casual lunchtime talks in which we invite key figures from the cultural scene to speak to us for about an hour. Ellen graduated from the Yale School of Arts, and she attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture prior to that. Her work is in the Sarpchi collection, and she's been included in the USA Today exhibition that was at the Royal Academy in 2006 and at the Hermitage in St. Petersburg in 2007. Further, she just opened an exhibition at White Cube earlier this week that I urge you all to go and see. She's going to be in conversation with Marina Cashdan, a writer and curator based in New York. She's contributing regularly to a selection of publication amongst arts, modern painters, frieze, wallpaper, and surface. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to you. Thank you.
So I don't know if everyone can hear me in this room. If you can, if this is a good level, then I will keep it at this level. As many of you, like myself, are probably anticipating this show. It's been, for me, since 2007 that I've had the chance to see a body of Ellen's work in one room, and in this case, two bodies of work, the watercolors and the paintings. So it was very exciting to be at the opening on Monday. If you haven't seen the show, I urge you to see it. Just going right into the questions from that. When first entering the gallery, one of the things that strikes me the most is the scale, the size of the works. And though modest in size, as we can see by this slide, the subject is very commanding. And as I walked through the ground floor and tried to understand or pinpoint what it was that made the subject matter, or the subject in the work so commanding, obviously, other than the subject matter, it is the scale. And scale has been a very important part of your work, I know, and in this case, and in the case of the show, the scale is 1:1, which is a very unique quality to a work. If any of you have a chance to get the catalog is also 1:1, which I thought was a really beautiful depiction of the show in book form. Can you talk a little bit about why you chose this to approach your work or a subject in the 1:1 scale and how you approach scale?
I mean, maybe because I could, if you're painting a tree or something, you obviously can't make it 1:1 scale, or you might be able to. I think that they became, this show actually, this is my last show at White Cube, but the works actually became smaller this time because I think that I've gotten much more detailed, like they've become much more dense. So that's why I think that in some ways a really small painting can hold the wall, because there's so much information in there. And I think because I'm observing such small things, it's actually in some ways easier for me to just measure from point to point than if I'm just doing a 1:1 scale. Like, I really enjoy working that way, just literally taking the measuring stick and putting it sort of like against the model, because I'm so close and I can do that. So, and I don't really have a reason to make it bigger or smaller, and so.
Does it say something about the intimacy of your space and the space of painting, whether it's in a studio, which for most of your work is done in a studio? I mean, not just because your studio is in New York, and often size is a potential limitation, but because of the intimacy of the subject and the subject matter and your relationship to the subject.
I mean, I think that I want it to be a true representation of the thing I'm painting, and so making it that size. I mean, the funny thing is that people always think they seem smaller than life size, because we have this idea in our mind that life size is, that we're more important, or that it's bigger. And so in order to get something to read as life size, you actually have to make it bigger. But that doesn't really necessarily. I don't necessarily need it to read as life size. I just want it to be life size. So.
In terms of, I felt Rob Storer, who wrote the essay in the catalog for the current show, he said so poignantly about your work that it's stylistically refrained. He said that you quote, hold back from dramatizing your interest in men in ways that prevent the viewer from projecting specific sexual scenarios on your encounters with them. But yet he says that even with the austere manner in which you deliver the male body and all its imperfections, which I think is the quite stunning part of your work, is that they're not resembling Greek gods or Olympic swimmers, as he mentioned. And you're presenting this to public scrutiny. But you do so with candor and kindness in the way, for instance, a partner might look at their partner. And this for me, made me think about the question of, and I'm sure this comes up quite often, of the male gaze on the female, and in this case the inverse scenario where it's the female gaze on the male. But yet you do so without that sort of sexual intonation. And I wanted to know if you could speak a little bit about sort of, Barry Schwabsky also said she neither humanizes nor dehumanizes her motif. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the neutrality of the work, because they are such loaded subjects in some respect.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's like a way of achieving balance, because often the subject can become really dominant, and it becomes more like a representation of it would become more of like a representation of a sexual act or something than a painting. And I kind of want there to always to be a balance between the subject matter and the things I'm doing in the painting, like formally. So in a certain way, and I kind of always want things to be a little bit open-ended.
Yeah.
I think if there's a specific message or I would find that like right away I would understand it, and it wouldn't be interesting to me anymore. So I like it to have a lot of different things, like maybe, and it definitely has the intimacy, but also, I mean, I think that it's not one way or another. There are a lot of different things like put in there.
And I know that Tim Marlowe, the exhibitions director at YQ, asked in jest, but I'm sure people ask you, would you ever point the same gaze at a female body?
I mean, I think that I do get that question, and I can completely understand why. I think that another thing that Tim said that I thought was sort of interesting during that same, it was during a toast that he gave at my dinner, is that it's sort of like, from a male perspective, it's kind of like relentless to have to, or something to have to, be confronted with all these male body parts. When you don't necessarily, what can a man kind of make of that? Like they don't necessarily want to see that. So I think, so it's sort of interesting to see how men respond.
Well, because so often the gaze has been on the female body.
Yeah, it's much more comfortable for, I feel like for everybody, I mean, especially I can understand why a man would want to see a woman, but it seems like everyone's more comfortable with seeing women, maybe because we're used to it. But then at the same time, I mean, people have to understand why, as a woman, it would be a different, like a man is a different subject matter. That is the subject matter. It's not like, yeah, technically I could paint a woman, but I don't have the same kind of, I don't think, interest, or doesn't spark my.
But we also spoke about the ambiguity of the composition too. So in certain respects, for instance, with the armpit, and in various other works, you because it's not a very classical approach in composition, it sort of abstracts the subject to a certain degree. And I wonder if that that vantage point is or that composition is interesting, or an intentional way to sort of lighten the subject, or the potential symbolic nature of the subject.
Oh, so it's like kind of like it's like a man, but it's also this abstract thing.
It could. I mean, in some cases, it's very clear and representational here, but especially in some of the watercolors, you can't automatically. You're not directly drawn to a specific part of the body. You know that it is part of the body based on the context of the work, but you can't quite pinpoint where yet.
I like that. I mean, I kind of like to have a range of like what's recognizable and what isn't, but I think that in a way I've been moving, and in making smaller and smaller parts of the body, I've been moving more towards that kind of abstract. Like I've kind of it's sort of like working through things. Like I had this idea that I wanted to confront the male subject and see exactly like how I felt about it, and then like, you know, and learn about it too, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't just like saying what I thought, but also just sort of 50-50, like trying to figure something, learn something, and understand something, and say something. And then I think that, so I started literally with that penis painting, I just went straight for that, and then now I'm sort of moving, it's like a process, so I'm moving, in a way I feel like I am moving towards something more abstract, like I have sort of said, like, kind of what I want to say, maybe. I mean, I don't know exactly, you know, it's hard to say, you know, what I'll be doing in 2 years or something like that, but like, I feel like, you know, I've done this, you know what I mean, and now it's like, and this also is like, you just need one, like this painting in the show, you need a whole show of that, so it's like, I don't know, and so that's kind of...
well, and this sort of now segues to the question that I had the privilege of writing about you for the Vitamin P2 book, and as I was looking at your work, and I've been very familiar with your work for about 5 years, and I feel as if you know you had constantly been going back between the figure and the still life, but yet your treatment of the still life is very much the same as a treatment of the human body, and that you have this unique power of giving a decaying object life. For instance, the gourds. If many of the audience are familiar with the gourd works and tumbleweed, for example. You give the same. You have this power of giving a decaying object or making your subject impotent, yet really very physically present. And you know, everything from rocks and logs and plants and gourds become estranged from their natural habitat. I mean, this is probably from the desert, I would assume, and enters your studio. But you still feel uncannily sort of in its natural composition, and I wanted to talk about your engagement and interest in both the human and human figure, but also the organic material, because you often focus on organic material, both living and decaying as well, with you know, elegance. So this is, for instance, is the tumbleweed work from 2005.
I think it's 2005. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that. I think that there's something that I like about, I feel like when I paint something man-made, it's already been, like, it's almost like it's already been designed or something, you know, like I'm painting someone else's design, like it's hard for me to get over that. I think that I think that I can make it work, you know, but there's something that, an element of discovery, the kind of randomness of natural forms, and they are really more abstract, and kind of open-ended in certain ways, you know. So I like that. I mean, I feel like there is a difference in some ways in my attitude towards the still life objects, because, like, for me, I kind of like project a certain, like, human consciousness or something, or feel that, and like to me this is like this like ball of anxiety or something, maybe because of how it was to paint it, but and the gourds, and then those are really, you know, really out. It's like trying to control something that, I mean, all of the paintings are kind of like trying to control something that's completely out of control. Like those were really rotting, and it was hard to, and even with the, you know, men, it's the same kind of, you know, trying to keep a model in the same pose for a year is not really what, it's just really difficult to accomplish. But, you know, so in some ways, like the men, it's like with the men, it's so loaded, like a human is so dominant as you know, if you see a painting of a person, you always go straight for their face, you know, and maybe not see everything else in the painting, whereas, so I kind of had to like tone that down, whereas these, I feel like I'm, you know, kind of playing up. To me, they are almost like, they do have human qualities to me in some ways, the subjects.
And I mean, there is the sort of, whereas the body has some sort of symbolic, you know, obviously resonance, and so does the still life classically. I mean, is that something that you took in, you were considering as you're a student of painting and considering sort of the classical still life and how these objects were approached maybe 200 years ago versus a contemporary,
I guess when I see like a really quiet domestic still life, that's something that I just want to do a still life that's not like that. That's kind of like unruly and not about like some sort of domestic harmony. I like sometimes looking at those, but I really feel like still life is completely undervalued. Like I've seen so many like Picasso and this mistress and that mistress and this kind of portrait, and then it's like you hardly ever see like, I don't know, maybe here they've had it, but like a still life show, Picasso still lifes, like you do have that, but it's just, I really connect with still life painting. So in a way, I spent so long being a still life painter before I started painting the figure that, I think that's somehow, like I perceive the figure as a still life, I can really...
Maybe that's where that disconnection comes in, or that, not disconnection, but where the neutralizing quality comes in when you approach the figure, as opposed to sort of a sexualizing quality.
Yeah.
But then talking about, you talked about working with models for a year. It's a good, you and I have spoken about how long it takes to make one of your works, and that's something that very much interests me, is the process. In your case, Michael, processes like involved in a painting that takes from 4 months to 15 months to make. And we spoke about everything from choosing models and in a relationship that's very much a long-term relationship and in a very intense period of time. Can you tell, I'm sure the audience is also very interested to know a lot about how you create these works. If you can go through a little bit about your process, and both with the still lifes, but also with the figure work. As you're working with a subject in front of you, you're working from life as opposed to representation, which is a very different process, a very different approach.
So like working from the still life versus working from the model?
Yeah, we can talk about that, and then working the model, how you choose the models, what sort of relationship you have with the models, and how long it takes, and how you approach a work.
I think that the still life. I would like the model to be a still life model, because that's like what available all the time. All that kind of scheduling and all those, and having someone really rely on me financially and all that stuff is the stuff that I don't necessarily want to do, but have to do to make the paintings happen. But at the same time, it does. It is. The models are tremendous support to me. They help me outside of just posing, and it's nice to have this energy of another person there, and it helps. Like if I have to get in at 7 in the morning, to have someone there at 7 meeting me. It's not. I'm not tempted to. I can't go get that cup of coffee or whatever. I have to be there. So it has its pros and cons.
Yeah.
For sure. And the model is subject to pain, which is.
We spoke about some models getting injured.
So that's terrible feeling when someone is suffering. And I just feel I feel terrible for him, and it's just that knowledge. If you were out to lunch with somebody and you knew that they were like miserable with you, or whatever, miserable. It's just not a great feeling, but.
How do you find the models, and then what sort of criteria do you have when you're working with a model?
I try to find somebody who I find interesting and intelligent, that I want to be around. And then that's not, but then at the same time, people who want to work for my paintings aren't really financially or in stable parts of their lives. So it's like hard for them to commit to that amount of time. They just want to know, they just want to get to the next month or something like that. So it's really, I just try to find somebody who is, who what they want matches what I want, and it's not easy always to find that actually.
And in terms of that, and then you find the model or you find the subject as a still life subject. How do you approach making a painting? Do you make preliminary drawings? Can you talk is probably a constant back and forth painting and repainting, and
Yeah.
and there must be so many layers under your work. It would be, I mean, we have an example of that process of painting, but for me, which is a wonderful thing to see, because as viewers seeing the finished product, we don't know what was underneath.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have to be really specific what doing, like, you know, before I start, because I'm going to be, you know, spending so long on them, so I have to make sure. You don't want, like, I see, like, with, like, Lucian Freud, like, how he'll, like, tack on, like, a little, like, I can understand why that happens, like, you know, he'll tack on a little foot that went off, or maybe he meant it to go off, and then he decided he wanted there, but you know, I try to really get it right within the frame, so I really, and I try to figure everything out before the painting starts. Although I have in the past had to start over a few times, because once you see it on the canvas, you're like, oh, it looks different than in the drawing or something.
And would you ever paint from representation, or can you talk about the difference between painting from life, other than the sort of limitations and also the relationships and versus painting from representation, which a lot of painters
from like photographs or something. Yeah, I mean, I did try that after graduate school, working from photographs, but I mean, honestly, for me, I mean, it's not a value judgment towards, you know, everyone who works that way, but for me, it wasn't stimulating enough. Like, I mean, even though I might, you know, complain in the moment about the conditions changing and how, you know, it's also kind of thrilling to actually be in front of the thing, and there's so much information there to draw from, that it just becomes like much more intense than.
And I think that's why you have such incredible detail in your work, from the translucency of the skin and seeing the veins to the pores of the skin, the hair, and I don't know that you could get that if you didn't have the body in front of you.
Yeah, and I mean, I also like the subjectivity, because otherwise I feel like it's really like copying a photograph.
Yeah.
So like really the photograph is more dominant in some ways than this, just like what it's like to just translate through my eyes to my hand directly, not from this flat thing.
And you were talking just about various conditions, and I thought that would be a good way to segue into your Marfa residency.
Oh yeah.
And spending time in this very famous in the art world part of the world in Texas, in Marfa, Texas, in the U.S., where Donald Judd had essentially built the town as sort of an art mecca, and not intentionally, though it's happened that way, but it has also created a really strong art community. You were able to go to the Chinati Foundation.
Yeah.
And then working in the desert, either in open air, which you were doing, or versus working in a studio in New York, which has its own, I'm sure, problems. You know, can you talk about the residency, and then also working in plein air, and we also have some pictures.
Yeah, that's the painting.
Oh, just going back to process.
I mean, I think that I kind of, it's one of those things, it's like I knew I wanted to do this outside, but I didn't really understand what that entailed. Because, I mean, we're talking about, it's like when you're from the East Coast, I mean, maybe it's like almost like seeing the desert like a cartoon. It's just like a hot sun, and like it's hot, it's sunny, you know, and then that seems like what I could expect. So I brought a tent, like a big
We should probably give some background for the work, the one work that was made for the residency, of the shin, of the man's shin, and essentially he was laying down in the desert and tumbleweed, and you painted him for how many months?
Well, the residency was for 3 months, and I kind of knew that was unrealistic, like, you know, but I also just sort of did the, you know, told myself, okay. So I ended up spending 4.5 months.
And, I mean, this is the process of this painting being made. Which you don't often get to see as on our side, on my side, as a viewer. And then this is the scenario, the setup.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what was it like to paint in the desert, and were there things that you expected versus things that you didn't expect in terms of weather conditions, in terms of...
No, I mean, it's like May, okay, I can just give you a quick rundown. Like, I got there April, so March officially is the windy season, which means that it can be gusts of wind to like 40 or 50 miles. So that will take over any, like, you know, your easel, your tent, anything will just fall over during those conditions. And so I was getting there in April, but the windy conditions really lasted until May. So that's like, so that after, or no, till like a little bit in June. Then in June you hit like the really hot season where it gets over 100 degrees. And then I guess in July is really the rainy season. So like it's not, like the reason it's so green, like the guy was joking, the director was joking, he's like, yeah, you know, there's just some summers where it just ends up looking like Ireland. Like it's just like, man, obviously this doesn't look like Ireland, but it's like, it rains so much that summer in order to make it this green. And it's like that kind of like torrential. It's not like the like what you have here or New York. It's sunny, you see the clouds coming because it's like just this panorama, like, you know, 360 degrees. They come in and then it just dumps it. And then the ground stays soaking wet, and that's what I was painting, like, you know, which turns it a completely different color. So it was just like all these, and then of course there are all these like weird, it's like all these like little thorns everywhere that get, like if you sit on them, they get into, like just it's like a really inhospitable environment.
All these various sort of...
Yeah, and I had to sit on the ground, so then you have that like kind of like your leg falls asleep, your back hurt, like it's just like, just not a comfortable, it was not a comfortable place. And I'm like, I took off my like complete burqa for this picture, but like, it's like, it's not like, for somebody pale skin like me, it's just not a comfortable environment.
And so did that change, do you think that changed the painting? Did it make the painting different from paintings where you're in a more comfortable environment?
I mean, yeah, I think that I actually ended up, it was like achieving like one of the, you know, like the highest level of
endurance,
something that I had before technically. I think it was like I had to like give it everything I had to make that painting, you know? So I think I ended up, I didn't know, I mean, I didn't know what the painting was going to end up like, but like, I feel like I did end up with a good painting because I did that.
Process and good work. The desert seemed like quite a natural place for you to go because your work, in your earlier work, with the tumbleweed and the cacti and the various organic material that you focus on, they seem to come from the desert. So I don't know if it was because that's always been a place you're drawn to, or just by chance you were painting cacti and tumbleweed I mean, has the desert been someplace that's always drawn you?
I think, yeah, because it was like this foreign place that I didn't know. It seems so like so American or something in a way that when you're living in New York City, that you see all these American images, but you know they're very different from my day-to-day experience. So I mean, but then I was done with that. Like I was like, okay, I've moved on to men. I'm not painting tumbleweeds anymore, you know. And then I was invited out there, and then I was like, I had to kind of think of what I would do in that environment.
And how do you feel as if that residency might have changed the works that you made after? Because just from what I noticed, I found that there was often more natural light introduced into your work. In the figures, I found that I saw natural light, especially in the torso, hitting the side of the torso. And I automatically thought, I knew it wasn't made in the desert or made in Marfa, but that maybe that sort of, you took it back with you and that sort of lightness. And then I realized you had told me it was a window, but I did sort of, I wanted to know if any of that experience do you think has sort of influenced this current body of work that's on you right now?
I mean, I think that it was, I mean, I think it sort of took things up to another level in terms of what I expected from myself. It was like, I was like, oh, I have to do like this level of, you know, I don't know, like I have to make it as good as that or something, I don't know. But I also think, yeah, it was kind of pared down compositionally, and And so I think that yeah, this definitely followed that in terms of having something really simple. Like that was kind of like 3 bands horizontally, and this is kind of like 3 bands kind of more vertically. So I think maybe something about the desert also, it's like that kind of stark environment, and the leg is very much like almost like a monotone painting, not
as
literal.
opposed to, I mean, the leg as opposed to some of the other works in the show.
Yeah. I really didn't know how I was going to paint that dust. I was like, oh my god. Like, what? How am I supposed to?
Well, then you go from that to seeing this sort of very light and seeing this natural light, or the sort of bands, like you're saying, that sort of almost what you think of as simplicity of the desert.
Yeah.
Sort of appear. You know, and this sort of leads to another thing that appears in your work that I hadn't seen before, but you had told me that was part of your earlier practice, is watercolor.
Oh, right.
And both aside from the body of paintings in the show, oil paintings, you have a body of watercolors, 10 watercolors on view, which are even more precise in parts of the body, primarily the face, from the lips to where the chin meets the neck, which to me was stunning as all of them are. And wanted to talk to you a bit about your early watercolors that I wasn't familiar with, and why you decided to start using the medium again.
I feel like I just had this idea for a long time that I wanted to have a voice in 2 dimensions. Like, I don't know, because, and then I kept looking at drawing shows and trying to figure it out, and then I was like, okay, I want to do watercolors, but I had this whole weird idea in my head that I do not want to work with the models anymore. Like, this will be great because I will have a break from the models and I'll be able to do something without the models. But I wasn't really that inspired, and then I had Ralph Wiener over from Chinati to my studio in New York, and he's like, Ellen, like, you know, why, you don't want to paint, you already painted the gourds, like, this is, you know, and then I was like, you have to do something else. And I was like, oh, I have to do the men. And I started, I just felt so inspired. Like, I had all these ideas, and it was great because there's certain light, I can only work in certain lighting conditions in my studio. So it's hard with the models because, like, I'll be like, okay, well, it's pouring rain today, let's not work.
Yeah. Kind
of situation. And then that's really frustrating for me and them. And then this just opened up like a certain flexibility for me. Like, okay, well, maybe the light isn't working now, so let's move on to a watercolor, and we could just do a couple hours here and a couple hours there.
And there seems to be a different quality in the way that you're approaching the subject, almost more looser and more playful, and we talked about that. I mean, is that to do with the subject, with the time that you were making them, or with the medium? Because
I mean, I feel like you know, the show spans 4 years.
Yeah.
So I feel like I am in a different place in my life, you know, and so I feel like the watercolors do kind of represent that in some ways. Just I don't know, kind of like maybe in part like being single at the beginning and then a new boyfriend, or it's sort of like, I don't know, maybe because it corresponds to maybe because I started these, you know, at that time. It's hard to, I feel like they're just more about the experience, like some sort of tactile experience with looking at the male form. And also I feel like I can be a little bit more playful, like, and spontaneous in a way, because I can tell myself, okay, if this doesn't work, I'll just throw it out. That's what I tell myself.
You had said to me that it doesn't have to go through the same machinations as an oil painting. The oil paintings really sort of, they are very rigorous, and I think Tim had said the other night they're almost cruel.
Oh, that's what you're saying, from a male perspective.
In a way. And it was cruel from a male's perspective, but I took it as also cruel. And there's such an intense process in your paintings that it's almost cruel. It's almost masochistic or endurance for you in the way that you approach them. I mean, you're there every day and spend hours a day on a painting. These watercolors are such a different scenario. I mean,
yeah. I mean, it was a relief. Like, it just feels like, I thought about it, at first it felt like, oh great, like I can get these things done in like 60 hours, like this is great, like I feel great about this. But then I realized like that they're so much smaller than the oil paintings that like per inch it's probably the same amount of work in some ways. Like I don't know, it's not like, but it's just because they're so much smaller I can actually get more different ones, like a whole selection of different compositions, and that's really fun for me, you know, too.
I'm trying to see if I can find the scale, the actual scale of the watercolors versus paintings. Yeah, no, they're not.
Yeah, they are.
These ones. So, versus slims and skins. But when you see them on the wall, they feel smaller.
They're much smaller than the paintings.
Yeah. And then I wanted to ask, we had a chance to work together a few years ago when I was at Modern Painters magazine. I organized an interview between you and another American painter named Eric Aho, and he asked you a question if there was an artist, however unlikely, that you would want to be paired side by side with, who would that be? I thought I'd start with that question because that often gives insight into your
I mean, like, I remember him asking this question, and I kind of thought in retrospect, like, what I would say. But this was only in a specific instance. This is not, like, who I would be paired with, like, in eternity. But I think his question was, like, a little bit like, if it's surprising, like a surprising...
He talked about his interest in Ellsworth Kelly, and that no one would have ever thought that he would find an interest in this artist based on his style of work, and asked if there was someone similarly that you felt that no one would necessarily pin you with, but that you had interest in.
Yeah, so I thought of Tom Wesselman.
Oh.
I didn't say that, but like, because Tom Wesselman in some ways is like really kind of sexist. Like he's like the ultimate, like he eliminates the woman's face, and it's just a. But I remember there's some things he does by turning especially with the smaller body parts, by turning them into still lifes. And I remember thinking, like, I had this idea to do this hand painting, like I had the whole composition in my mind and everything, but I was like, I don't know if I have time. I don't really have time to do this for my show, you know. And then I was in the Armory Art Fair in New York, and they had that modern section, and they had a hand, like a different composition that he had done, and I was so into it, and I was like, I have to make my hand painting.
Was that like inspired, the hand?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, like the composition was already
in your,
like how I would do it was already in my mind.
Sort of a sign.
But it was a sign, and how much I really connected with his hand. I was like, I want to do a hand. Like I'm gonna do like.
Are there other works where those connections are present that that you know of, or I find those really interesting when you can make this.
I mean, just like I was again like this time, in the British Museum, they have this not lending library, but like some sort of viewing room of all the drawings. It's so amazing there. And so on Wednesday I went, and again, like I just love the Dur, like the ox snout, like that watercolor. And now that I'm doing, last time I saw it, I hadn't been doing watercolor, so I'm just like, and at first it was really intimidating, I'm like, I want to paint like Dur, or something like that. That's not a good starting point. It's like really stagnating. But now I've already done my thing, and I'm looking at the Dur and just appreciating it. It's so funny, just the snout. Like I love that snout.
Well, it reminds me of, I think he asked a similar question, like on what work does, if there is one, on what work does your work hinge, or if there's a specific work that really made you be a painter.
Oh my gosh. No, because like when you're like the teenage mind is like looking at all the stuff that you just cycle through things from what the angsty like I was like really into like in college like Egon Schiele, which I'm still into Egon Schiele, but like just that kind of like angsty thing that he's doing or something, and then you kind of move on. Yeah.
There seems, and now I can recognize that tension in the work in the same way. I mean, is that something that you're playing with in your paintings especially? I mean, just saying.
I mean, I want there to be a tension, like, and throw a lot of different elements in that sort of compete with each other and create a tension, or like I like that. I like to go in that direction, not necessarily something that's just like 100% pleasing.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's funny to even think about that, that connection now, because I hadn't really been thinking about that.
And then just in terms of being an artist, both a contemporary artist, and often this question I'm sure is asked, but how do you define success and failure? I mean.
Oh, right. I think, it's just sort of what I was saying at the beginning. Like, I feel that it's really when everything in the painting works, where there's not anything that's dominant.
Yeah.
Like where everything is sort of interesting in it. Like, it's not just about, it's not just like a person doing something to another person or whatever. The subject matter, the formal elements, and everything sort of just come together and work together.
I think that's where I wanted to ask the audience if they had some questions. I wonder if we could take it to the audience for some questions. Yes.
One of the most perplexing comments I've ever heard in art history is when Cézanne said that in painting an apple, he wanted you to believe that he was painting the back of the apple at the same time as showing you the front of it. Could you talk to us a little bit about that? I mean, when a figure is sitting on a stool like that, how much time do you spend around the other side?
And like no time, but I feel that it's more about a belief. Like when I'm painting the hand painting that we just talked about, like I believe, like there's a certain moment after that, pretty early on, where I believe that it is the thing. You know what I mean? It's like this belief that the hand of the painting is a hand. You know what I mean? It's no longer just this like canvas. So I think it's more, that's how I sort of perceive it.
And is that something to do with the difference between seeing something and spending time with something and eyeballing something and just using a photo?
For me, yeah. For me, it would always be, the reality might, I'm not entirely sure because I haven't been working with photos in a while, but for me, I think the reality would be that photo, and I'd be constantly trying to get it past that, to something else other than that photo. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Alison Miners and I'm chair of the council here. Tim's also on the council, so first of all, can I just say thank you so much for being here today. I'm a big fan, I love the show. I found one of the strongest works in the show, or two stronger works, those with an interruption. You placed a cactus, I think it was a cactus in the middle of one of the work, and it creates a different tension. And I wondered if you'd just like to talk about that and what brought you to that point.
I think with that particular painting, I think that I really wanted a head, but then I never want the paintings to be about the specific. I want them to be specific to what I'm seeing, but I want them to be about what I'm trying to say and not about a specific person. So I think that I wanted to have the head, but not have it be a portrait. So I put the cactus in front of the head to kind of like interrupt the identity of the person, and I kind of liked how like aggressive that was in a certain way, and how it competed for the foreground, like to have elements in like the tension you're talking about, like elements in the painting competing for prominence. So that was something that I was looking to do with that.
Now, can I follow that up, Ellen? Because I think we've all stayed away from the propping element of the work, which to me is one of the strong kind of ideas behind the work, or omnipresent ideas. Could you just, particularly because it's the angle of the propping and how you see that, it's a very it's a formalist thing, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. I also think it's kind of like part of the subject. I think that if you if you have like a body and you crop out the head, it's saying something, like to me, it says something about, the subject, that the head is excluded. It's not, that part is gone or whatever. I try to be like very pointed in what I include and what I exclude. So.
This is a lot, not to interrupt, but you talk a lot about the vantage point and voyeurism. And I think that also says a lot about sort of the composition that you choose and the cropping that you choose. You talk a lot about sort of a voyeuristic vantage point. Is that something
I mean, I think that's like, in some ways, like, most pronounced in that bent leg painting.
Yeah.
You know, because you're looking through that leg, kind of. It's, you know.
It's almost that you feel as if you're almost entering a personal space. For
Yeah.
me as a viewer, I feel as if I'm entering a personal space looking at that work.
Yeah, like I have fun with
Because
that.
of
Yeah, because you're looking, you're sort of peeking through it, like, you know, like almost like if you were looking through like a door that was like half open or something like that. I like that as like a framing device. I like it.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Do you ever abandon painting once you've started?
Yeah.
Because I know you do commit an awful lot of time to it, but once you get going, you sort of say, well, no,
Yeah.
you do.
Yeah. I mean, so there's times that the models quit, and then the painting's just over. People are like, can't you do anything with this? And I'm like, no, not unless it was like maybe just like a few days before, and I had to sort of. But yeah, I mean, it's usually early on though, where I'm just like, I'm not, like I did start a painting after my last show, like I had all these ideas, which I hope it doesn't happen again, and I was like, okay, you know, here's the idea, like, you know, and I'm starting to paint it, and I'm just not feeling it, and it's like, I'm not liking it, and I was working on something else at this, I was working actually on this painting at the same time, and then I just left it, because it just wasn't that, it wasn't working, you know, so, but once I'm like 70%, you know, or once I get going with it, I usually don't abandon it at that point, you know.
Is it rare that you work on 2 paintings at once?
I don't, I prefer not to do that, I guess, although I did do that because it's just confusing with the models and everything, and a lot of these things are just really, they change, so I have to do them. But I would do that, like, you know, I have to maximize my time, you know, because it takes so long, so like if I had like you know, it would be nice to have like an evening painting and you know, painting for all different like conditions or something like that, you know, if they all stayed together, but I usually work on one at a time.
Just curious, you know, how do you control the viscosity in the watercolors? I mean, you don't think of the watercolors being, you know, easily applied to those very small hairs and so forth. I mean, how do you actually get so they don't run? I mean, what do you do in terms of the viscosity?
It's just like, it's just like using less water. I mean, there are different effects. Like some people like that kind. Like you look at like Emile Nold or something, and it's like this absorbent paper and the stain that kind of like flares out. Like it's really beautiful. But like I kind of like I can actually work with a watercolor in a vertical position because I'm not using very much water, so I don't have to have it flat or anything. Pretty much.
It really has to be pretty viscous. You really have to get it quite dry almost.
It's kind of dry. It's like a little. They call that. I think they call that like dry brush, because like Andrew Wyeth is all like dry brush. But I don't
recognize it as watercolor because it really is.
I don't think it's that. It's not like a dragging dry, but it's like something like, you know, maybe closer to that end of the spectrum than a kind of really loose watercolor.
Great.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah. How do you keep focused with, like, if you don't speak to your models, or if you do need to speak to your models, do you like listen to music or like radio, or like what would be like your favorite things to listen to, maybe besides speaking to the models?
Yeah, it's so tempting to listen. Well, I try to keep it just, you know, it's such a long day that I try to kind of like keep, you know, like maybe when I first get in I'm not so focused, so we chat, and then I'm like, okay, you know, this has to end, like, you know, I have to focus, and then I have like a whole like series of podcasts that I listen to, like that I've gotten really, sort of like having almost like a hobby at the same time as painting, like, you know, it's like, oh, you know, it gets exciting. Some of them, like This American Life comes out once a week, and so I'm like, oh, it's Monday, This American Life, or, you know, just, and then there's like the Buddhist podcasts that I listen to now because I'm like trying to like you know, everyone's like, oh, the painting is such a meditation, but really, it's like I need to meditate to actually, you know, make these paintings. So like listening to that, especially if I'm anxious, I'll like calm down with the Buddhist podcast, like whatever I need at that moment. Sort of like when you listen to like the really, like, you know, upbeat music when you need to wake up, or you listen to the comedy, like also music, yeah, all sorts, and that will keep things fresh. Like, oh, I got this new music, like that's great, and that I can really zone out to that, like really. So just try to keep it moving, you know, in the studio.
What about like when you never have utter silence?
I have sometimes, but I feel like I'm torturing the models. Like I try to, you know, it's not my real job to entertain the model, but you know, someone's like just totally. I mean, if they have a hand free and they can read, like sometimes silence, I'll just sort of be like, oh, it's silent, you know. But usually, most of the time not. But occasionally, like it's, you know, some silence. Yeah.
Do you know what you'll be doing next?
I think I do, but I don't know. I sort of do. Like I know I have like something in mind for like a transitional painting, you know, that will. Like I have a mind for, what I'm saying is I have a painting in mind that I could start right away. Like I think it's important just to keep working as opposed to stand back and be like, what am I going to do? You know, so I do have, but I don't know if that's going to be the beacon and the, you know, it's different from this, but it's not, like I don't know if I'm going to do a whole series of that. I just want to do one painting, and while I'm doing that, like, sort of like, you know, put up the creative antenna and see what comes, you know, comes down, you know, I don't know, but that's sort of how, you know, and just hope it happens, yeah. Yes.
How do you like, you seem to be enjoying this give and take, but how do you like the process of presenting and revealing yourself and your works of art?
I mean, I enjoy it. It's fun to talk. I mean, it's very, it would be really shocking if I was still working towards my show right now and I had to do this and step back. It would be really incongruous. Like if I have to go out to an opening and I'm in the middle of, you know, sometimes I don't feel very social. But because I'm sort of here and I can't go to my studio or anything. I just can enjoy, you know, that the work is done and, you know, talking about it a little bit, right? And it's fresh, you know, it's sort of like it's not like I've talked about it it's the first time I'm talking about it, so it's more fun. It's not like I'm repeating, like, you know, playing the same song that I made like 20 years ago or something, you know, so it's nice, yeah.
Is it difficult for you to sell the work after putting so much of yourself into it?
I mean, I'm keeping one of the paintings, so, which I haven't done in like, I mean, seriously, like, I can't even remember, I haven't kept a painting, you know, just for myself, so.
Which one?
I'm keeping that leg painting, maybe because you know, I feel like I earned it after suffering so much through that process or something. You know, that's just like, okay, I'm keeping this one, and then it's nice to have that reference, like to have it to look back on and stuff like that, and so. But I mean, at the same time, I have the intention of them going out into the world. That's part of their job or whatever. So that's built in that's going to happen. So I mean, I would. There are a couple that I wouldn't mind having, but you know, I just have to kind of be like, okay, that's, you know, going out in the world.
Are there any other questions?
Yes.
The show of paintings, you walk into a single room, so you are immediately confronted with all of the works, with the body of work. At what point, you talked now about a painting that you might do at this moment as a transition painting. At what point did you understand what this show was going to be for you in terms of its component parts? I.e., you had to envisage it in a space, so you had to know what elements you needed to include, and as you say, the hand, at a certain point, hand had to be part of it. Was that because it had to be part of that group of paintings, or was that just because you challenged yourself to finish the hand? Because it's very specific, you know, you are finding different body parts, and it works as a coherent. It doesn't feel like there's something missing, or something that needs to be added, or...
I mean, I think that maybe kind of the, the first 3 paintings were the back, the rock foot plant, and the bent leg. And the bent leg was just like I was like, I have this idea, and it wasn't necessarily, the whole time I think from the last show at White Cube, which is my last show before this one, it was kind of like, okay, I want to do men, but how am I going to do it? You know, I'm trying out all these different ways. And then it was a kind of a narrowing process, so that like probably after I painted those 3 paintings, I felt like I was really onto what the bent leg, the back, and the rock foot plant. I kind of had a sense of everything else felt like, okay, this is what I want to do. And I definitely was thinking of the whole show. So like I definitely painted the torso because I started seeing what I had done, which wasn't, I always had a whole show in mind, but I saw what I had done already up until that point, and I thought, okay, if I have a back, and it kind of occurred to me like, oh, I have all these parts, like what other parts would really round out the group or make the show complete. So it's sort of like completing the show. And I thought I need a front. And then the hand, I don't know, I don't know exactly what role it plays in the show specifically, but I felt like the show needed it to be a complete show. Like I felt like there needed to be that hand. I mean, I was determined to make that happen.
So what was it, 2 years ago you kind of knew the bits that needed to fulfill?
Yeah, I had the head, I think the head like was in like 2010, and then I knew I needed a head for the show, and then so maybe 2 years ago I started to feel like this is what the show needs.
Can I ask you another question? And when you get your model, you meet your model, and you say there needs to be a rapport between, when you meet them, are you looking for have you already identified the parts of their body you want, or in meeting them, do you identify what parts of their body you're interested in?
Both. I mean, but mostly, with the back, I saw him and I was like, okay, he has this crazy back hair pattern, and I have all these different ideas I could do with him, but I'll probably get only one painting out of him, so I'm going to use this thing about him is the most interesting. But that's still when I was, trying him out for different poses. But then, it became more and more and more specific. I definitely was interviewing for an armpit. I would advertise. It was embarrassing. Also, I didn't want everyone to know what I was doing, so I sort of was like,
do you get them to strip off? Do you kind of do?
If it's necessary for the armpit, I just take off your shirt, sit in the pose. I knew what I wanted the pose to be. I had an idea. It was basically fully formed. I was really lucky to have this guy walk in who was a bodybuilder, because that just never occurred to me as a type to be looking for. How likely is that? And then I was like, whoa, that made his arm, some people just have these really kind of thin armpits that they're not curvy like that. So I was really lucky that happened. At a certain point, I don't always get exactly what I'm looking for, because they have to be the right personality, they have to be reliable, and it's really hard to so I might get something that's slightly different from what I was searching for. But in this, I got something even better almost than what I was searching for.
Did you reject any armpits?
Oh yeah, tons. Tons of armpits got rejected. Yeah. And then the original guy, it was good. I was so into his armpit or whatever. It was actually strawberry blonde, totally different. And then he said, oh, I have to go on this residency or something over the summer, and I didn't know if I would be finished by that point, so I had to let him go after starting the painting with him, which ended up turning out okay, but it was really sad because I had really gotten attached to the idea of the painting, his pale skin and his whatever, I was like, this is going to be the greatest. But then, lo and behold, I was able to work with someone else.
There's an age range. It seems to, or is that maybe that's just me projecting, but there seems to be a kind of male age range which is within your sphere of kind of age. You haven't gone for a much younger or a much older. Has that ever entered your consciousness in terms of painting age within your subjects?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want my idea of neutral, which isn't neutral at all, but I never want it, it's sort of like I don't want someone too fat or too, you know what I mean? Like I want it to be like, so you're not thinking in the painting, oh, she's mocking this fat man or something, or this is about being fat. Like, you know, so I have to try to get something where you're not thinking that. And so with the age, like I don't necessarily, I want it to also be like in the realm of desirability. Like I don't want it to be like this like old withered armpit or whatever. I don't know what it would look like, but like, you know, I want it to have like maybe some sort of virility or.
But you do see
something.
lines in the work, especially in the watercolors.
They're like usually like in their like, you know, also who's gonna pose for it, but like, you know, people generally starting out, so they're usually in their 20s or 30s, pretty much the models, and like, you know, otherwise, like, you know, had some a model who was older interviewed for the torso, and his skin was like really like sort of saggy, you know what I mean? And that was sort of like, oh, that's not exactly, so a little saggy.
So you're almost envisioning the space, the shape, as opposed to anything, you know, physical about the body necessarily.
Yeah,
you seem to talk about with the armpit, finding a shape that you want.
Yeah, I wanted that kind of that shape with the armpit, and I want them to be. I don't want it to be about age. I just want it to be about the male form. I definitely try to give a lot in the painting, and hopefully people will respond to it in some way. You know, any type of response is. I don't have a specific. I don't want people to feel a specific way, or I'm interested. Like I'm interested that Tim Marlowe, you know, responds the way he does, and different. You know, that he's having that response is interesting to me. So.
It slows people down. Your works, you have to look at it. You have to look at it for quite some time. You demand that time from the viewer. I think we don't experience that often, especially in such a visually saturated world. So we should probably take only one more question. I think we're over our 60 minutes. But are there any other questions? Thank you.
Marina, thank you so much. That was really a great insight into your work and practice. I just wanted to quickly announce our next talk. Our next Culture Now is going to be on December 9th, and it's going to be Martin Creed and Fiona Bradley, and I hope to see you there again. Thank you very much again.